So let's get going. This is our last class. I almost forgot to make this recording. So last time I showed you Dora sitting up in her tree. That's not her tree, it's Sam's. And again, this is an older photo, Dora with goggles on. Um, she hasn't had to wear them much, but previous Australians, we've had two of them actually develop diabetes, then became blind, had cataract surgery, and allow them to walk on the beach. We had to protect their eyes. They had to wear goggles all the time. Anyway, silly. Let's get going. So Wednesday is Day of Hope. That sounds like a good thing. And National Walking Day. I try to walk as much as I can now. It's easy exercise, and they say that if you walk every day, that you'll live much, much longer. Easter's coming up. And I don't know about you, I don't like these. These are sugary treats, but my daughters, since they were little kids, love Peeps. They're both, well, one's over 40, one's will be turning 40 this year. They still love Peeps. Anyway, um, if you were on campus, that the classroom we've got is SOBI 265. And I keep making reference to projects, and now in class refer to the construction project that's happening just behind us, the new SOBI Inspiration Hub. But if you go back a little more than 25 years now, 26 years ago, this was the summer. I think it was, I say spring, it may have been closer to almost late summer, where they were doing the initial excavation for the SOBI building. This is where the front entrance would be where those three excavators are. And over in the other direction, that's where the main offices are for SOBI. And right down in front here, it's actually where SOBI 265 is. And the pictures are taken from my office at the time that I had one office that had a beautiful view of the construction site. Didn't like me doing that, but anyway. Um, anyway, we've got final assignments due Friday. I've tried to make it quite short. There's a tutorial posted. There's really no reason to be late on this one. Your last quiz is on Saturday. Last discussion, it's due next Wednesday, Wednesday of next week. Course feedback survey is still open, though the responses have slowed to a trickle. Just over 100 right now. Lots of nice things you had to say. Appreciate those. And as I said, if you like the course, consider applying to be a teaching assistant next year. That we actually had trouble finding enough this last year. We employ quite a few. So day 24 is about storytelling and dashboards. So as you get a project completed, you're conveying it to some other audience, and that's storytelling. And we don't teach you enough about storytelling. It's become a very fashionable topic now in the business community, others about the need to tell stories in a whole bunch of different areas, from not just marketing, but HR, you name it. And dashboards are a tool that's being used to convey information, lots of information in as simple a fashion as possible. There are lots of really awful dashboards out there, but there are some that are very, very good, some very creative. Many are too busy. Anyway, we'll look at a few. So some of the guidance on storytelling, including the stuff that we did last day on charts, it was guidance I gave to students a number of years ago when they had to do a course project in this course. And they really didn't know how to complete a project, and they didn't know how to communicate it because we hadn't taught them anything. And they were advised, write a report like you were writing it to the dean about issues that affected them, and they used the course survey data to make their arguments. And I gave them a variety of documents, the description of what it was I wanted. I tried to give them guidance on managing projects and some guidance on reporting or writing a project report. It was quickly thrown together because I realized that they were ill prepared for what they had to do. Um, and I gave them some examples of some reports that and what I liked and didn't like about them. So that's sort of where this comes from, what we've got in today's, and we're still using those same reports. Doesn't matter how old or new they are, it's the same type of issues that come up. That I may have mentioned it before. If you have opportunity to take a course that right now is an elective for you, it's called Operations Management, but next year will become a required course for students entering next September. That management science, it'll be called 2217. There may be one still being offered 3317. They're basically the same. But one of the important topics in that course is some very basics about project management. Um, they look at it from a more technical type of perspective. It's more the people issues that I find important with managing projects. Anyway, that's beyond. Um, anyway, there's no unanimous opinion on what makes a good report, and they're all sorts of advice you'll get. So this is just my opinion that what reports I was able to get people to read or not read. Um, anyway, as an academic writing reports, I initially wrote them like academics, and I found people didn't read them. That academic writing is one type of writing. Writing to managers and clients is different. So I'm going to use a couple of them. One is a daily blog that comes from the Nova Scotia Department of Finance. Thomas Storing, who is the director of the finance group for the province. He teaches part-time in economics here. That he and his team put together reports every day that are actually very, very well written. They get their data from Statistics Canada on most occasions, and Stats Can, with their daily report, is not nearly as well written as the Nova Scotia Department of Finance one. There's another report that sort of came, it was like sort of similar in some respects to a Stat Can report, though much bigger. That was a very interesting piece of research on how much do university graduates earn, and that it was not based upon survey data, which is quite lots of flaws in survey data, as we've hinted at through the course. This used tax return data on students from a host of institutions. They merged the institutional data about their graduates with the Canada Revenue Agency data on what was in their tax returns. So it was very good data. Anyway, we'll get to that. Daily Stats. So Daily Stats is a daily blog taking Statistics Canada data. Stats Can puts out half a dozen reports every day. And that what they is done by the Nova Scotia Department of Finance is take one, maybe two of those reports and write it from a Nova Scotia perspective of that national data. What's the Nova Scotia story? And it's intended to be a 5-minute read. Sometimes they're very, very long and it takes me more than 5 minutes, but they don't use an awful lot of text, a lot of charts. The charts are generally very simple, fairly standard sequence that they use, and a standard format that they always show Nova Scotia in blue, Canada's in red, other provinces in green. They don't need to describe each of the other provinces. If they did have a color for every province, and you got this beautiful rainbow, but it's too busy and too complicated. And it usually starts out with a line chart, followed by a column chart, and very often followed by a bar chart, or several. So this is just retail trade. It's just numbers, okay? And so it's just a time series, and you can see, okay, it goes up over time. There's the red line is Canada, Nova Scotia. We're a smaller jurisdiction. So generally our charts are going to have more bounce to it, more fluctuation with it's like a small sample versus a really big sample. Big samples, things don't move a lot, but small ones do. That they, generally you aren't looking that much at the scale on the left, and I don't even know what the index measures. It just presume if it's bigger, it means there's more trade. The notice how on the right, because we don't read the scale that's over there, that they show what is it today. So in June of 2019, Canada stood at 117.9, Nova Scotia 117.3. How big a change was that from the previous month or quarter or something like that? Minus 0.02% for Canada, but plus 2.8% for Nova Scotia. You can see that last little bit jump up for Nova Scotia, pretty flat for Canada as a whole. So you don't have to go to the left to read things. They've got it there for you. And really clear, really simple. This is a good line chart. So they want to break down the trade by province. How much change have we seen year over year? And they'll start out with Canada on the left and then go from Newfoundland across to British Columbia. So Nova Scotia is there in the middle, but it's blue, so it stands out. So again, I don't need to know what goes on, so much at the individual province. I may look to see, oh, who's gone way down or who's way up. But it's really, really simple. That in the text that goes below, it's fairly short, and I bet you most people don't read it. That they've already given me the percentage changes. Notice that on the bars. So I don't need to look at the scale on the left. They've told me how much it's gone up or gone down. That in the text below, they gave the year-to-date data. So that's probably the first 6 months of the year. So how much has it changed in the last 6 months? And they gave that in the text, whereas the chart is annualized from June until June. Nova Scotia, they bold-faced. Okay, they draw our attention, our eye to that one, less so to Ontario or Newfoundland or something like that. And they underlined year to date to remind you this is different. Okay, so important things use the underlying boldface if they read the text at all. That then they started getting into a lot more detail. That what went up, what went down, what are the components of that trade? And it's motor vehicles, furniture, electronic, building materials. There's a whole list of them. And the descriptions are quite long, okay, of what those different components are. So they did it as a bar chart. And they showed in brackets, okay, motor vehicle sales make up 29% of retail trade. It's a lot. And they put those in brackets to give us an idea that like electronics, okay, gone down a bit, but it's not a big deal anyway. But what are the ones that are a big deal? And turns out those are the ones that move more than anything else. They, again, at the end of the bars, like they had the end of the columns, they give you an idea of what is the change? How much has it gone up or gone down? And again, that's helpful to look at. And so it's a lot that's being summarized there. The text for it, now there are a few things here. One is makes no sense how they've listed these from top to bottom. Why motor vehicles maybe is the biggest, should be at the top, but why isn't food and beverage up at the top too? Or gas stations and general merchandise, and put these ones that aren't important down at the bottom? I don't know. When having commentary about this, which it basically says what's already in the chart, but if you want it in words, they put it in two chunks. One, which were the sectors that went up, and second one, which ones went down. They, with the list of those, instead of writing it in a paragraph, because a paragraph would be really hard to read, they did it in bullets. Your eye gets drawn to bullets. Bullets are very attractive. So when you're listing things, don't list them in a paragraph. Like that last slide, look at this stuff down below. You wouldn't want to read that. If they want to talk about the Ontario, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, so on, then put them in bullets. Paragraphs are hard to read. So again, this one should have done it. Bullets was a good idea. So that's a regular daily type of one that they'll have. And so one day it's retail trade, another it's construction activity or something else that is fairly predictable, same type of format. Every once in a while, they put out a big one and they're trying to tell a complicated story. And the hardest one for them to tell is the one about population changes. And that in chapter 12, I've got one of their stories. Here's another one. I should probably do one that's more recent because our population has changed so much in the last few years. We're seeing a lot of turbulence in it that wasn't there a few years ago. So they try to do it with a whole bunch of them. So they'll start out with a chart saying, what's the natural population change? Okay, that where is it coming from? That we have births and deaths. That's where we'd usually start thinking about things. So they've got that in two lines, one blue one for births, red one for deaths. And you'll see that births have been declining, that years ago families were much bigger, now they're pretty small, that we're also got an aging population, and now we're getting the baby boomers like myself, getting up there into their 60s and 70s, and they're dying. So deaths are going up, births are going down. To show that net impact, they've got another chart down below that's in green showing the net change in population. So before we had a positive net change, more births and deaths. Now we have more deaths than births. That why not just use another line chart? Well, to differentiate it, not just use a different color, use a different type of chart. Use a column chart. Still shows like a line chart, same idea, but it sort of distinguishes itself from the births versus death. Maybe you want to do that with immigration or international population. So we've got immigrants coming in. We have immigrants, those are Nova Scotians that moved out of the country. And then we have net non-permanent residents, students in particular. So they're not permanent residents, they're here on visas. And how is that changing? Okay. So these things are net change in these things. It's not the total for each year, but how much has it gone up, gone down? So it should be around zero if there was no change. This chart gets very busy. You'll see immigrants. We had a surge back in the mid 90s, and now we're seeing another surge here. And if you go out to 2021, it's much 2022, a very sharp increase in that. And immigrants has stayed fairly flat and quite low. International students, there's been a big boom of additional international students. And again, if you look at that for the last couple of years, if I extend this out, it's again a big spike up. They try to show the net change again with the green columns. For me, that got too busy. I think looking at three things plus net change of the three things was a bit much. It's also that they're superimposed. This one was easier because the lines floated above the net change figures, but it's complicated. I don't know if there's a better idea. That again, notice at the ends, it's given us what is the current value, or the value at that time in 2018, as to 10,000 more people in the province. And then how does that break up? And similarly with the births, deaths, everything else. So just the end ones did he give the numbers for. if now they tried to explain that with inflows and outflows. I might show you one of those later for students. But you had, this was your base population of 559,000. And then we had births, we had deaths taking you down, we had immigration taking you up, immigration taking you out, and then students coming in and taking us up. And then we had actually the interprovincial ones coming in from other provinces like Ontario, and that led us to where we ended up. I really don't like the chart. I found it hard to follow. I would probably prefer them just showing a series of arrows showing up, and we went down, then, or we went up again, we went down, we went up, and then we went up further, and this is where we ended. I'm not sure. They haven't tried doing it quite this way again later. It's a tough thing to show. They tried showing it by the different counties in Nova Scotia. I don't know, there's about 20 different counties in the province. And they showed it first as percentage change, and Halifax went way up. And I'm not sure if it's that informative. They tried to show it by the body count because Halifax County is really, really big compared to all the others. And so when they did it that way, Halifax was huge and everybody else was so tiny. So they took Halifax out because we're an outlier, and they took Cape Breton out because it was an outlier, the minus 311, and then showed what was left. I don't know. It's a tough one to show. They did use a pie chart. I actually like this pie chart. For someone that doesn't like pie charts, this was pretty good. Just showed you how big Halifax is compared to everything else. Even Cape Breton, that gets a lot of attention, it's pretty small compared to just Halifax. And that the other counties that you've got, some of them are just so tiny, tiny, tiny. Look at Guysborough or Victoria. They're 7,000 people. They're just way too small. Anyway, but the rainbow effect, it was an attractive thing. It did brighten up the blog. The blog was incredibly long because they had a whole bunch of things at the different county level, and it got to be a bit overwhelming. One of the types of charts they had there, which is interesting, is what we call a pyramid or butterfly chart. That I call it a butterfly. They use the term pyramid, but it shows you the population by age. And it's generally done as a butterfly to have males on one side, females on the other. Both sides look similar. So this is for Halifax in the dark red, dark gray. In the ghosted line, that's the province as a whole. So with Halifax, it's got more younger people, young adults, than the province as a whole. And it has fewer old people than the province as a whole. Okay? So it is a younger place. Young people moved in here. And that, but you can see if you wanted to know what the workforce was going to look like in 20 years, you know, how many people are going to have age 40, look down here. How many people do we have your age, 18 to 20 today? That's going to be moving up in the future, up here to being in their, late 30s, early 40s. So you can see we're going to have a smaller workforce. We've got a bulge of older people moving up by the looks of things here. Now, won't actually end up that way because Halifax is different in terms of inflows from other regions. Look at Guysborough County. It's a pretty small county. Okay? It's not a lot of people. And so that's why it's so jaggedy. But all the young people, once they get old enough to move away, they hit 20, they leave. Look at the glut of people between the ages of 20 and 40. They all left. Those people will move up, and in 20 years, you'll get a skinny group now between 40 and 60. look at the elderly people here. Now, these are older folks in another 20 years, if they're still alive, are going to be in nursing homes. So healthcare is going to be really expensive in Guysborough in another 20 years. But you can, if you wanted to look at your markets for a product or service and see what markets would look like in the future and what your workforce would look like in the future, these charts tell you what the future looks like. This this was a StatsCan report. I looked at it because it had to do with teaching staff at universities. And they just put out another one that's interesting for a geek like me to look at. It's really, really boring what they did. But this one here, here's the title, Number and Salaries of Full-Time Teaching Staff. It was boring, and when you read it, it's boring too. But one of the things they had in there were breakdowns by sex, the men versus women. And the chart they had, I'll show you in a minute, it says deans and full-time academic staff proportion by sex, 1971 to 2018. So from when I started being a student to sort of more what today looks like. It's a boring heading. Why should I look at it? The text, they departed from their norm, and they didn't just have full-time academic staff by sex as one section and full-time academic staff or deans by sex as the second. They put the heading as being increasing representation of women and increasing presence of women as dean. So that's what the story was. And it was quite a strong story that came across in the chart. Here's the chart. So that's it, boring title. Looks rather plain as well. That last class I told you it's best to minimize the ink to information ratio. When I started as a student at university, it was a little more than 10% of instructors were women and 88% were men. That if I know the percentage that are women, I know the percentage that are men. I don't need two lines here. I don't need the red line and the gray line. You give me the red line, that tells me everything. Percentage that are women. That why show both? It's redundant. But this was the gap between men and women when I started school. And this is what the gap looks like today. So a better heading would be gender gap in academic staff and deans has decreased quite significantly and continues to decrease. Slower pace. The biggest change was during the 90s, but it's still shrinking, that what it looks like between the two. And if you look at them by age, you'll see the changes are. That this is a very, very good chart. It tells an important story, but they didn't give a heading as to what the story was. But you got to think about what's the story. This was a very interesting report, the first of its kind that came out in 2019, because you'll often hear that going to university will increase your average earnings, and that maybe doing an arts degree versus a business degree or a science degree, what's the payoff of doing these different sorts of things? And how do those earnings change over time? And most of the data that's been used in the past is survey data, but it's always had very high non-response rates. So a lot of people that, you can imagine if you graduated and you couldn't get a decent job and you were asked to give feedback on your degree, a lot of those people would be too embarrassed to say how much they earned, that they might well lie. And it was hard to get honest responses. And the response rate, as I said, has generally been very, very low. The best I've seen is like 30, 35% response rate, but more often than it was like 10%. So should we believe it? Anyway, this one, it's a very good piece of research that uh, the executive summary in particular, but also in the report itself, I like the use of um, headings and color, that um, they use a lot of boldface and they put stuff in this orangey sort of coloring. And so they would have very, very heavy text with lots of numbers in it and so on. It's hard to read. And they would intersperse these others um, that, but the highlights they put in the orange. And periodically they would be putting some stuff in boldface to draw your eye in and maybe want to read. And you think, oh, arts, okay, oh, social science, what's it saying about them? And they, uh, it drew your eye in. Still too text heavy, to be honest. They should have used more lists and bullets and that type of thing. That it's really, as I said, this was very, very good research. And the report itself is worth reading, even to look at the process they went through of how they get the data, um, how they get permission to look at your tax data, which is supposed to be confidential. How do they have to clean it? And they did an awful lot of good explaining about their methodology that you often don't see. That in the charts, they use generally line charts, column charts. Some of them were boring. I don't know. This one here is over the 5 years from when 1 year after graduation to 5 years after graduation. How do your earnings change? And looking at people with a professional degree versus those, say, with a college level certificate to being a bachelor's degree, that type of thing. I'm not sure how well done that was. Did we need that? They had a better one. They did the same stuff and they just showed 1 year after graduation, 5 years after graduation, did it as a column chart, and they uh, showed you the percentage increase over those first 4 years that you've been working. And so that is quite striking in terms of wage gains. It's a lot more than inflation over that period of time. And with inflation, you might expect a 12% maybe increase over that time period. Seeing a 46% change, that's huge. Even a 27% change, that's quite substantial. That they did emphasize that averages only tell part of the story. So they used box and whisker. They threw out the outliers. Okay? They actually didn't use quite what we use. Our box and whisker, the box is the 25th to the 75th. They truncated on the bottom at the 10th percentile and on the top at the 90th percentile. But again, it becomes useful to show, yes, some people with college degrees earn more than people with a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but you can clearly see the trend. Averages can be quite deceptive. The and you can see, how dramatic the changes are. Professional degree, you're looking at, say, a law degree, I presume. So the report was way too long for anybody to read. That an academic would probably be the only one that might have read the whole thing. That the executive summary was too long as well. They used way too many words. But I'm just pointing out some of the things they did do were worth noting. Now, sometimes you'll use special charts. I just wanted to show the one in terms of population change in the province. That was hard to read. This was one I tried to use to explain quite a few years ago to the university community what happens with our students. How does enrollment change? That in particular, they were asking about student retention, which is a really important issue. And they figured, well, students just flunk out. That's why we lose students. That wasn't the truth. during the period I was looking at, it was fairly stable enrollment. We were getting in about 2,600 new students each year, and we had graduated about 1,500. Wow, that's where did 1,100 students go? Okay, so this is flows in, flows out. Yes, I know it takes a while to complete your degree, but this is in the bigger pool, what's coming in, what's going out. So I did it like a big tank with flows of water or something. That, well, each year we got 1,200 that walked away and 300 that we told to leave. Their grades were too low. We get some of them we are able to bring back, but only 300. So we have a net loss of around 1,200 students per year. And this was the first time they really started thinking about the flows in and the flows out and what's actually taking place here. Imagine what your enrollment would look like if all the people coming in stayed until they graduated. We didn't have them walking away. But again, there were a lot of negative comments about students and why they left. So this was, again, back in 2005. Well, I was looking at a cohort that came in 2005. That, and looking at them about 7 years later, we had somewhat more than half had graduated or were still finishing their degree off. And but a third of them had walked away. And of those that walked away, only a handful were on probation. Most of them were in good standing. And many of those had really, really good grades. And they didn't all walk away quickly. We had a group that left at Christmas and more of them the next spring. And then another large group stayed for a second year, big investment. And a fairly large group stayed all the way to their third year before they left. It was quite an extreme sort of story trying to do, but I tried to do it with different types of charts than what we are traditionally doing. So these can be very powerful communication tools, these charts. Tables, less so. Again, that form follows function. So define your objective, craft a very compelling story, use pictures to complement the story. I think of it like telling a story to a small child, that bedtime stories. Kids like picture books, at least little children do anyway. The child would look at the pictures, you read the story, and they use the two of them together. And a good picture book had both compelling story and compelling pictures, and they worked together. They complemented each other. That the pictures are the things the child remembered. That I say they touch your soul. You feel pictures. You read words. Dashboards is a type of storytelling of a lot of different things at once. So this is my car. I've got a Subaru Forester. It's a very busy dashboard. It's too busy for me. And actually, with the display in the middle of my dash, I can scroll through about 4 or 5 different versions of it. This panel up here, it has 6 different flavors that you can flip through. Way too much. There's too many buttons, too many things. I get very confused on it. So, but this is what a dashboard is. It's a whole bunch of things. Some of it's numbers, some of it's dials, graphs, that type of thing. Oh, by the way, this one here, it gives me how full is my tank. There's a graph. It's got a chart here that's telling me, am I running my engine, the speed I'm going? This instance, I was parked. Is it increasing my fuel economy, improving it, or is it making my fuel economy worse? They've also got a whole bunch of numbers over here about my fuel economy. This tells me again, is it getting better or worse? How many clicks can I go before I need to refill the tank? Oh, there was just too many things. Way, way, way too many things. So again, what's the objective and what's the story you're trying to tell? And there's a lot of very good tools out there for doing these dashboards. Microsoft's got Power BI. It's a fancy version of Excel in a sense, or a thing on top of Excel. Uh, uh, the other one that's popular is called Tableau, but there are a whole bunch of others. During COVID, this was one the province was using. And I think this was from last fall. I took a picture of it. I'm not sure if it's even still active anymore, but it's very confusing. I don't know what many of these different things are and what the charts are actually measuring. They've changed the dashboard several times over, but it isn't clear what's the story they're trying to tell. Okay? Oh yeah, this was last November. I took that picture. I haven't been in since then. That one that we got uh, the universities in the maritime provinces, that's Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, all share our data with the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission. And they do a lot of reporting to government about what's happening at universities. And a year or so ago, they built a dashboard to show some of the data they've got. And so I went and tried playing with their dashboard. So looking at business enrollments, how have they changed over time depending upon where students come from? Now, I showed you my little chart that I had for Nova Scotia last class, my line chart of how Nova Scotia enrollments were declining, international were going up. This was Ontario, and this was so on. The blue line here is Nova Scotia, okay? But and the others are, again, pretty small. Oh, yes, I'm looking only at one studying in Nova Scotia. So this is much like the chart I had last time. Theirs, though, I could get into looking at some other things. I was curious about breakdown by institution and where their students come from. And again, I'm looking at just business students. And it allowed me to use this timeline up here to look at different time points. So I started out with 2006. And you can see St. Mary's, dominant player of Nova Scotia students. Here's a column chart, a stack column chart. We've got the lion's share of Nova Scotia students and the most of the international students. And we've got even a significant number of New Brunswick students and then some others. Dalhousie does well in Nova Scotia, has a lot from Ontario, and then it had a bunch of others. And St. FX, well in Nova Scotia, also a few from other places, and so on. Okay? That let's fast forward into the future and look at the dashboard that way. So this is jumping ahead to 2017. Okay, so 10 years later, St. Mary's still big player, but it's grown its international substantially. But look at the others that Dalhousie has grown its Ontario ones and its international, and it still has a good chunk of Nova Scotians, as does Acadia and St. FX and Mount St. Vincent for that matter. Cape Breton University is starting to get into the international market, as has Mount St. Vincent. So changing game here. Let's go ahead. What's it like now? So this was the most recent data we had for 2021 when I built this, the 21-22 year. And St. Mary's International had shrunk. Dalhousie, Ontario got bigger, International got bigger. It started pulling in more from Western Canada, from Alberta, and it's now just a little bit bigger than St. Mary's. Cape Breton, well, if you watch W5 the other night, international students have taken over the place, and almost all of their business students are international. They have a token small number of Nova Scotians that are present. Very, very radical changing demographics that we're seeing within this. And so seeing how your markets are changing, these dashboards, really useful in being able to do this and see what has been the history in the past. Doesn't predict our future. That would be nice if it did. That one that just came up last month, that Nova Scotia Power told me, go look at their dashboard for my house. So this is my house. And it gave me by time of day how much electricity I was using. Okay. That was the solid bars here. And what was the temperature outdoor? Hey, these don't line up very well. Look at time of day though. First thing in the morning, cold temperatures, furnace kicks in, using a lot of hot water for showers, cooking, whatever. That middle of the day, that it's warming up and maybe people aren't home. Oh, it's supper time, stoves back on again, dishwashers on, doing laundry, what have you. So it's interesting to see the matchup between the two. And they can pull this from my power meter now. What shocked me was this other one. I looked at energy details and appliances. Now, all they've got is a meter. And they're telling me over the last year, 2 years, this is my the temperature seesawing up and down, I think, something like that. And that I'm looking at the what's my energy cost, how much electricity I'm using. And they've broken it down by how much I'm using on heating during the winter months here, that maybe on cooling during the summer months, on hot water heating, doing laundry, other types of things. Where did they get this from? I really don't know. They've, I'm presuming, used some type of generic model that they've used for homeowners that they've got detailed data on, to use some type of predictive modeling to go and figure out what I'm likely using my power on at different times. And that's how they got this breakdown here. It's a little scary though. I began to wonder, how are they able to monitor what I'm using my electricity for? All they've got is a meter. But it's interesting if they were trying to convey to you what to do to reduce your electricity consumption. This chart's very useful. That I'll just show you, I think, one last one. And this is a fun one that is, if you're into the sustainability goals of the UN, and St. Mary's is involved with crime, and these are big issues, and you want data on that, this is the website to go to. Okay? It's called ourworldindata.org, and data on everything. And let me see if I can show you something. Okay, let me go actually to the website. Where are we here? Here we are. So this was one that I find neat because this was COVID, and I can go and pick a bunch of countries if I want and watch to see what the mortality rate looked like over time through COVID. But you can play it. As you go over it, it gives you the exact numbers for all of these different spots. But you can play it like a video, which is fascinating. So this is the very beginning of COVID, the winter of 2020, and seeing how it affected different countries. We're sort of sitting closer to the bottom. But, you know, the UK and Italy, serious crises that happened. And in the summer of 2020, I think there was a feeling, okay, we've gotten over it. The scary part's over. And then in the fall, everybody's going back to work. The lockdowns might be coming to an end, and everybody going back to school, and we get into what they call the second wave. And they warned us there'd be another wave. You can see how dynamic it is, and how much things are changing and rapidly, and so on. And I can just, and here we are today, and it looks like the worst is over. Okay, so mortality is down to COVID deaths are still there, but it's relatively low. A couple per million is all we're really seeing here now. Really, really, really low. So is it over? Well, depends upon how you're measuring your data. Let me hide this for a second. And that if I go up here and ask them, this is confirmed deaths, I'm looking at a 7-day rolling average and smoothing it all out. But I can look at other things. So it isn't just country and what I'm looking at. And mind you, I can also look at tests, hospitalization, vaccinations, all kinds of different things. I'm going to look at what's called excess mortality. I think I've shown you this. How many more deaths than you would normally get at that time of year or on that day? So switch it. Get a load of this. So at the beginning, it actually had us being a little bit below zero, that in terms of the historical average. So our mortality rates compared to the previous years were getting better. People were living longer, that type of thing. And then we hit the first wave of the pandemic, and we had a lot of deaths with old people in particular. Now, you didn't have to report the cause of death. The other one, they were looking at reporting of, was COVID the reason why these people died? And then we got into the second wave of the pandemic. Okay, we never dropped down to zero again. And since then, it stayed pretty flat. So that a number of these jurisdictions still have about 10% more deaths than they would normally have. Mortality rates are up quite dramatically. Notice Canada, we stopped reporting data. There's been serious reporting problems. Nova Scotia is one of the offenders there of not reporting its data on a regular basis. But this, again, these dashboards, these ones are very, very complicated. But they're quite interesting to see how these things have been changing over time. They're fascinating. They're fun. They got a lot of glitz, some of them, and you get lost in it. I get carried away with it. You've got to go back and ask, what was your objective in building it? Who's your audience? Is it managers? You're tracking costs. You're tracking quality issues, customer satisfaction, sales by territory, by salesperson. What do you really need to know versus what is nice to know? What can be a distraction to you? Will it actually change the way you're behaving? Okay. Are there any decisions that rest upon these dashboards? In many instances, no, but it is giving you a sense of what the temperature is like. It's a weather forecast type of thing. That be careful though about putting too much in there. I was listening to a fellow on the radio a year ago, and it was a call-in show about problems with your car and fixing your car. And he made the remark that he also works as an accident or car crash investigator, car accident investigator, and looking at what was the cause of the crash. And in his view, most car accidents were due to driver inattention or distraction. And he wasn't talking about cell phones. He thought it was the complexity of the dashboard. People are seeing too many things in front of them, and it's distracting them. So it's maybe too much information is a bad thing. So anyway, that's it. Course is over. Hopefully you enjoyed the story. I've tried to keep it as simple as I can, but we've covered a lot of complicated material. If you're telling a good story, try to keep it simple, clear, honest, and then you're probably going to go back and do it all again and see if you can't do it better. Thank you very much for joining the class this term. I know, okay, it's a required course. You didn't have any choice, but you did have a choice in coming to St. Mary's versus going somewhere else, or you had a choice of what program you wanted to study, and you chose the Sobey School. Thank you very much. Good luck with your exams. I hope you have a good summer holiday. Be calm, be kind, be safe, take care. There's Dora. This is where I'll be heading next week, back to the beach. And hopefully there's going to be some sand there on Hurdles Beach. And this is my view. We have a small cottage but it's got an amazing view. Very peaceful. And there's some of the links to some of the things I showed you. Take care. Bye now.